In this video, I want to show you how to paint your Death Guard in the scheme of the Pallid Hand using the miniatures we get in the Kill Team starter box. You'll not only learn all about the basics of painting miniatures, I'll also be showing you how to create definition and get everything highlighted. And so you can follow along, this is an easy to follow step-by-step guide showing you all the steps and techniques you'll need, so by the end of this tutorial you'll have the confidence and knowledge to paint your own Death Guard however you want. As well, if you stick around until the end, I'll show you some cool techniques to weather and add interest to our Death Guard. Welcome to TableTopReady, my name's Michael, and I want to show you in this tutorial how we can paint some Death Guard Chaos Marines in the colours of the Pallid Hand. All of the paints and brushes I use throughout this tutorial will be shown on the screen as I use them, and they'll also be listed in the description along with any hobby equipment I think you'll find useful, with affiliate links to where you can buy them. And before we get started, I do want to say a massive thank you to all the amazing people who've made this tutorial possible with their continued support. It really means a lot. As well, if you enjoy my content here on TableTopReady, then let me know by clicking that like button or leaving me a comment. I love reading them and hearing about your own hobby. My goal for this tutorial is to get you started painting miniatures and show you a really great way to get involved in the Warhammer 40,000 hobby. As well, to be able to take what we've learned and continue to collect and paint and expand our collection even more. When it comes to building your miniatures, we can decide whether we want to fully assemble them or leave some parts separate to make painting them a lot easier. For this tutorial, I have chosen to build our Death Guard in sub-assemblies to make showing you how to paint them a lot easier, but you can fully assemble them if you want, the steps are still the same. When it comes to undercoating your miniatures, I undercoated them using Wraith Bone, which is going to make painting that bone armour so much easier. Something else we can find useful is having something we can hold on to whilst painting. Here I'm using some plastic shot glasses. This is because having a painting handle or attaching the miniature to something to hold on to makes painting more comfortable and prevents us from touching our miniatures too much. If you need even more help getting your miniatures ready for painting, I do have a dedicated video on the channel showing you how. Also, throughout this tutorial, because I'll be showing you all the techniques and steps that you'll need to get your miniatures painted, I've made it easier to follow along with by splitting the tutorial up into different chapters. And now that we have our Death Guard built and undercoated, we're now ready to get started. In the first part of this tutorial, I want to show you how we can approach painting our miniatures and start learning about the basics to create a great foundation for the more advanced techniques later. Once you've undercoated your miniatures, the best place to start is by getting some of our base colours painted. This lets us spend time choosing what colours we want to paint everything, and painting becomes less overwhelming as we've created a great starting point to work from. The first colour we're going to be using is Screaming Skull, and we want to apply this all over, which is going to help get everything else painted later. And so we achieve best results when painting, we also want to make sure to thin our paints, and I find an equal amount of water does the trick. As well, I like to remove excess paint from the brush on some paper towel first, which helps give us more control over how much paint is deposited. And when we're ready to start painting, we want to keep our brush moving and avoid going over any areas we've already painted, to prevent creating any unwanted texture whilst the paint is still drying. Then once you're done, because we thinned our paint, it won't have covered so well, so we'll need to paint another layer using the same process. Painting in multiple layers like this means we can get a strong base colour without losing any details. We just need to make sure each layer has fully dried first before applying another one. It's really important for us to learn the very basics of applying paint to our miniatures if we want to achieve a better standard, and it's really important to practice this if we're just starting out or if we're looking to improve our painting skills. When you're done with your first base colour, you should be feeling more confident about painting and how it's applied. So the next areas to get painted are the shoulder pads, and these we want to use Death Guard Green, again making sure we build up to a solid colour following the same process as before. Once you're done painting those shoulder pads, we want to get all of our brass trim and other brass details painted using some Runelord brass. And when using our metallic paints, we need to remember that they're used and thinned down like our normal non-metallic paints for best results. After you're done painting all those brass details around our Death Guard, let's use lead voucher to paint all of our silver details. Whilst we're working on painting our base colours, we do want to do our best to be as neat as possible, but if you're like me then you will have been a bit messy and made a few mistakes. That's okay though, because we can always go back and neaten things up and clean up any messy areas as we go along. Doing this really helps make our miniatures look so much better once we're done. If you ever want help deciding how to paint things and what colour they should be, I like to head over to the Warhammer website where they have loads of images and turnarounds. Once you're done getting the first colours painted for the armour, I want to show you how to create a wash, which is going to start bringing out all of those details and help the armour look more weathered and aged. To create our wash, we're going to thin down some Seraphim Sepia with an equal amount of Lamy Medium. This is going to dilute the strength of the shade so we don't overpower or dull the colours we've already painted, but still give us that desired look we're after. And using Lamy Medium means the shade will still behave and flow in the way it's supposed to, which water could affect. When applying this wash, we want to use enough to cover our miniatures comfortably to avoid it pulling up too much in areas where we don't want it to. If you do see this happening, then we can use our brush to remove any excess we don't want, and we'll need to keep an eye on it as it fully dries. Using washes are a great way to bring out all the details and add interest to our miniatures in a relatively quick way, but we do need to be careful in how we use them because they can be really messy and affect the colours that we use them over. Once the wash is completely dried, you'll see how it's done a great job of bringing out all of our details, which is actually going to help us get everything else painted, and for this we're going to switch to using contrast paints. Contrast paints are different to our other acrylic paints as they're more like inks that are formulated to give us our base colour and at the same time create our definition. Let's start by using Black Legion on this cape, and to achieve best results we want to apply contrast as evenly as possible. And just like when we're painting our base colours, we want to avoid going over areas we've already applied the contrast, and we want to use enough to cover areas comfortably. We don't need to thin our contrast paints, but I do recommend working from a dry palette so we can control how much we have on our brush. Take your time making sure we finish each area or detail before moving on to the next, as the contrast dries pretty quickly. Once the contrast has dried, sometimes you may find you need to do a second coat, so repeat the same process and apply it again to get a more solid colour. I'm a huge fan of using the contrast paints. They're very versatile and they can be used alongside the more traditional acrylic paints rather than instead of, and this is going to allow us to be more creative and achieving different effects and styles. Once you've finished the cape, we can also use our Black Legion contrast on other materials like loincloths and wraps on staffs. This is also used for any pipes, ribbed areas and any other details you want to be black, including weapons and flies. Remember to take your time and try to be as neat as possible, but if not, we can go back any time to neaten up with our base colours if we need to. Let's work on something a bit more fun, which are all the pustules and drips, and for these details we use an Imperial Fist Yellow. Wherever there's flesh and tentacles we can use Guilliman flesh, and once this is dried we can make things more interesting, thinning down some Druchii Violet with an equal amount of Lamy Medium to make these fleshy details bruised and inflamed. This thinned down Druchii Violet would be great for any fly wings as well. For all of our teeth, bones, parchment and any skulls, we can apply Skeleton Hull contrast. Next, let's use Bile Red on weapon casings, eyes and lenses. Cygor Brown can be used to paint any straps, and for wooden details we can again thin our contrast down with an equal amount of Lamy Medium to give us a more subtle colour. After those details we can work on any smoke using Griff Charger Grey. When it comes to painting all the maggots, including the larger more monstrous ones, we can thin our Imperial Fist Yellow down with an equal amount of Lamy Medium to give us a more muted tone. As you can see, there are a lot of different details to get painted on our DeathGuard, but we've been able to get creative with our contrast paints and do something that's very achievable by most people, regardless of their skill level. When it comes to painting all of those Nurglings, just have some fun with it. Choose the contrast colours you think would work best, and you can even thin them down to get a lighter tone. Now we've finished deciding what colours we want everything to be, let's learn some more about creating definition and see how we can get everything highlighted. When we talk about creating definition, we're just talking about making all of our details easy to see and defining the shape of things. We've actually already did a pretty good job of doing this using washes and our contrast paints, but it's still important to talk about and why we do things. So if we go back and look at our DeathGuard before we applied a wash, you can see how flat everything is, making it difficult to see. That's why it's important to create our definition. Let's finish doing this applying some shades to our details to help define them even more. Starting with all the pustules and drips, we can use Cassandora Yellow. For all the silver details, let's use some Nuln Oil. And for all the remaining brass details, we're using Seraphim Sepia. Doing this is really going to help deepen all of those recesses and shallow details to make more of an impact. Shades are a great way to create definition very easily and quickly, but it is important to remember that they can be very messy and affect and dull the colours that we use them over. And when all of our shades are fully dried, we can work on getting our DeathGuard highlighted. The idea behind highlighting is to bring out any edges, areas and raised details to draw our attention to them and to make these features stand out more. The most prominent way of highlighting, and the one we most associate with it, is the line highlight, and it's this highlight that we're going to be focusing on. For this technique, it's a great idea to have a brush you vibe with, that you like to use, and I would keep it separate so it's always up for the task when needed. Again, we want to thin our paint and remove any excess on some paper towel first, which is going to prevent those thick blobby lines. We're going to work on highlighting our Pallid Hand armour first, and for this we want to use Pallid Witch Flesh. To do this, just take your time painting thin lines on any edges and around details to bring our attention to them. To make this easier, we can angle our brush against an edge and run it along the edge to create the highlight. For the areas we can't do this, then we just need to take our time painting thin lines where we want our highlights to be. If you want to know more about highlighting, then I've got a dedicated video on the channel which goes into more detail about what I find helps me and what I did to improve. For me, highlighting is one of the most important techniques to really practice and get good at. Not only will it help to improve the look of our miniatures, but it also helps to improve our brush control and hand-eye coordination, making us better miniature painters overall. When you're done highlighting the armour, you'll see how it's helped to bring out those edges and details, making more of an impact. When it comes to highlighting those green areas on the shoulder pads, we can use Nurgling Green. We can now continue to do this for the rest of the details, starting with all of our black details, using Dawnstone to highlight the edges and raise details. For any material where it's not so obvious where we want highlights, we just need to paint thin lines along the raised folds. After our black details have been highlighted, we can work on all the flesh coloured areas using Kislev Flesh. To highlight any yellow details like pustules and drips, and all those maggots, let's use some Screaming Skull. And Screaming Skull can be used to highlight all of our bone, skulls and any teeth as well. Next, we're going to first use Trollslayer Orange to highlight all the weapon casings, and for any plasma coils, we can highlight these using Fire Dragon Bright. Straps can be highlighted with XV88 and wood can be highlighted with Screaming Skull. Finally, for any lenses and eyes, we can paint little dots of Fire Dragon Bright in the centre. With everything highlighted, you can call our DeathGuard the Pallid Hand finished, but I want to use this last section of the tutorial to show you how we can weather and add even more interest. I want to finish up this tutorial doing something a bit more fun, and something that's really going to help elevate our DeathGuard, making more of an impact. And the techniques that I'm about to show you aren't that difficult to do either. Let's start by adding some greasy oily streaks and drips to our armour, and for this we can use our Seraphim Sepia. Something else we can do is using our Cygor Brown to paint chips and scratches along the edges of our armour. Once you're happy with how all that's looking, we can weather and age our metals, first thinning down Nylock Oxide with an equal amount of Lamy Medium and applying this all over our brass details. The next thing we can do is use some Scrag Brown, again thin this down with an equal amount of Lamy Medium, and this is going to help us create our rust effect. It's always worth spending that extra time and effort doing those cool effects and weathering, and when done right, it's something that can really help our miniatures stand out. To finish up this tutorial, let's see how we can paint their bases. For our bases, let's start with our base colour, which is going to be Skaven Light Dinge, making sure we build up to a solid colour. After that, we're going to apply Nuln Oil over the textured details of the base. Do a quick dry brush using Screaming Skull. And finally, let's finish our bases painting the rims with Storm Vermin Fur. For this tutorial, I wanted to show you how to paint what I would consider a pretty tough colour scheme, and to do it in a way that even someone new to the hobby could achieve. And it's been a lot of fun to do, and hopefully it's helped you get started on your journey into the Warhammer 40,000 hobby. So let's see how they turned out. But before we see the reveal, I do want to take a moment to thank Javi Perez, Swaggersaw, Shinobi and Gary Burkholder, who have all become supporters on the channel. Thank you so much. And if you enjoy the content here on TableTopReady and want to help support the channel as well, you can become a channel member or join my Patreon, which not only helps me create this content, it also gives you access to our Discord, along with access to lots of other perks for as little as £2 a month. And for every tier you'll also get tutorials early and be kept up to date with what I'm up to behind the scenes. Our DeathGuard of the Pallid Hand are now finished, and I hope I've been able to give you the confidence and knowledge to get your own painted. And they can now be used in your games of Warhammer 40,000 and Kill Team. Make sure to go and check out all of the other tutorials and content here on TableTopReady to see how you can paint some of the other units and factions, including how to paint the more infamous green, which is more common to see the DeathGuard painted. I really do enjoy making these tutorials, and I hope you find them useful. If you do, then please leave a like and let me know in the comments below. As well, make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss out on future content, and I'll see you in the next video.